Welcome to our second video. Hopefully at this point you've watched video 1.1, Introduction to Psychology. So now we're moving on to some more topics in chapter 1. First, we're going to be looking at ethics in psychological research because we can't just research and experiment any way that we want to. There are certain guidelines that we have to follow. So make sure you're taking notes in your digital notebook as you watch. So we have some learning targets just like in the last video. These are straight from College Board, and these are the things that you want to double check at the end of the unit to make sure that you know, because any of this material can be on your AP test, and you want to make sure that you understand what it is and how you can apply it to different situations. So go ahead and take some time to read over those. So let's jump right in. So when we're doing research or when we're doing experiments, who is the person that says it's ethical or not? So you've got a couple different things here. So the American Psychological Association, or the APA, which we learned about in the last video, they created a code of ethics in 1953 that basically let people know what is okay and what is not okay to do when we're researching something in psychology. Now, how are those rules enforced, or how is that code enforced? Well, that's where you have institutional review boards, or IRBs. They are panels of people that approve or don't allow certain topics or things to be researched. So these can be found all over. Colleges have them, but they're going to be the ones that really decide what's ethical and what's not, and if you can research something or if you can't. Okay, let's get into what makes research ethical or not. So the first thing that you have to have in any sort of experiment or in any sort of research is informed consent. So it's just like what it sounds like. You must inform anyone who is participating about every aspect of the study, all of it, that might influence their decision to participate, and to ensure that the participation, wow, words are hard, is voluntary. So that person has to be told everything in order for them to decide if they want to do it or not. And it has to be voluntary. No one can say, hey, you're part of this research, you have no choice. That's not okay. So there must be informed consent. Now, there is also assent, which is pretty much the same thing, except this is for minors, because anyone under the age of 18 cannot sign a legal document. And so this must be signed by a parent or guardian, and then the people conducting the experiment or the research have to continuously check with the children to make sure that they are doing okay, right? So you're constantly checking with them to see if everything is going well. The next thing is limited deception. So sometimes you'll see in studies or experiments, there is some deception, and that can only be allowed if it's absolutely essential to the study, and you must tell the participant all the deception that happened at the very end, and that is a process called debriefing. So if someone was deceived at any point in the experiment or in the research, then at the end, you must let them know every single way that they were deceived. There basically can't be any secrets, and they have to walk away in the same state as when they signed up. So if you're doing an experiment on the effects of alcohol, and you voluntarily sign up, and someone gives you a couple drinks and they want to see how you're going to interact with the opposite sex, they can't just send you home out of the experiment still drunk, right? You've got to debrief, and then you also have to sober up because you came in sober, so you got to leave sober. So if you're doing an experiment or a study, you have to leave in the same state that you showed up in. And then last but not least, we also need some protection from harm and discomfort. So you want to make sure that you minimize any sort of discomfort or risk involved in the study. And we want to prevent any long-term negative consequences, because that isn't fair, right? And then also there is freedom to participate, and that also means that you can withdraw at any time. So you'll see in some of the social experiments, that they withdraw in the middle of it, and that is okay. You can't ever force someone to continue with the research or the experiment if they don't want to. Okay, with confidentiality, it's again, just like it sounds, you have to keep any personal information about the participants a secret. We can't just share personal information with the research or the experiments. We have to keep that confidential. So if you are reporting the results, you have to do it in a way to where we're not spilling everyone's personal business, because that's not ethical. And then debriefing is just what I talked about before on the last slide. You just have to let the people know everything that happened in the experiment, any way that they were deceived, and you have to allow them to leave in the same state that they showed up in. Okay, here's an example of a consent form. It is basically telling you, if you sign it, that you understand all of the things listed on the form, that your participation is voluntary and confidential, and then it continues on. So if you sign this, you're agreeing to the experiment and you're agreeing to the guidelines. Okay, so sometimes we do research with animals. Why do we use animals? Well, because we have to study a lot of behaviors, and sometimes it's easier to do that with animals as opposed to humans. And we do share a lot of the same behaviors. Like, for example, when you are hungry, you eat, right? Both humans and animals do that. When you're thirsty, you drink. So do animals. And so there are some similarities. However, we do have guidelines for animals as well, because we can't just take animals, hurt them in the name of science, right? There's got to be a really, really good reason, and there's got to be some significant information coming out of that. But there are guidelines for animals. So you'll see in this course a lot of rat experiments or birds or just a lot of different animals, and just know that they are taken care of as well, not just during the experiment or the research, but throughout the entire process. So if you're an animal lover, psychology is taking care of them too. Okay, so who says it's ethical? So like I said, animals have ethical guidelines as well, because we want to take care of animals just like we want to take care of humans. So who gets to say it's ethical when dealing with animals? Well, it's still the APA. They have their code of ethics that was created in 1953, just like humans. And then like how we have IRBs, animal research also has panels as well, so they can approve research. And so that's the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. So these two work together to make sure research on animals is ethical. Okay, so what makes it ethical with animals? You basically have the ABCs of research with animals in labs. So we want to make sure that it's appropriate, nothing cruel and unusual. The only time you can inflict pain on an animal is if there's direct relation to whatever you're trying to figure out for the betterment of humans. So if it's like Alzheimer's research or cancer research or something like that, then you can inflict pain, but there needs to be a purpose. So keep that in mind. It needs to be beneficial. So like I said, it must benefit human psychological research. We can't just experiment on animals, set them on fire, do whatever you want to do. That's not okay. And then you must be caring as well. So you have to take care of the animals. So you can't put like 10 rats all together in a tiny box, right? You have certain regulations with cages and foods and the welfare of the animal. So psychology is trying their best to protect and take care of the animals when we're dealing with ethical research. And of course, we're also trying to protect and take care of the humans that are involved in experiment studies and research as well. Okay, so that is our last part of ethics. We're now going to move into thinking critically. So make sure that you find those notes on your digital notebook. It should say thinking critically at the top, and we're going to get right into that. Okay, here we go. Here is part 2 of this video. So we talked about ethics, and now we're going to get into thinking critically, because this is really important, because we don't want to be the people that just blindly accept information and just feed into our biases. That's not what we're looking for. We want to know how to think critically. So let's jump in. Make sure you're taking notes over this half of the video. Learning targets. Boom. Always got your learning targets right here. Like I say every time, they line up with College Board. Always want to make sure that you can check off these learning targets. Okay, so let's look at hindsight bias. This one is so easy to point out in other people, and you probably do it yourself super, super often. This is the idea that you knew it all along. So you're taking a test, you don't know the answer, so you pick one. And then you get the test back, and the teacher tells you the correct answer, and you're like, oh, I knew that. Well, did you? Because you didn't put it on the test, right? So this is the idea that we tend to believe after learning the outcome that we would have foreseen it, right? That we already knew it. And so it's just a bias that we have, and it's really, really easy to fall into. So we just want to be aware of that. So just keep this one in mind. When I was in AP Psych, we made a song. It was hindsight bias, hindsight bias. I knew it all along. I knew it all along. And I still remember that like almost 10 years later. So you're welcome. It will be stuck in your head, and it will be stuck with you for life. Okay, overconfidence. This one is one of my favorites because I see it all the time. Okay, we tend to think that we know more than we actually do. So let's look at these words down at the bottom. They're scrambled. Think to yourself, how long do you think it would take for you to unscramble these anagrams? So you might be thinking, oh, that's easy. I got it. That's going to take me 15 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, whatever. So most people said it was going to take about 10 seconds when they did this study. And then they actually tried, and it took them 3 minutes. So you can pause this video and try to figure them out before you keep watching. But I'm going to click so you can see the correct answers. So that's water, entry, and barge. Most people don't get those very quickly. Okay, pseudoscience. This one's fun. So this is popular beliefs that people relate to science that are not actually scientific. So ESP or psychics, like clairvoyance type stuff. So normally on the first day of school, I do a magic trick for you, and I tell you that I have ESP, and you're supposed to like explain to me why I'm not psychic. And I usually show you these videos that are so, so fun. But all of that stuff is not real, like psychological science. And so we really want to be careful, like what we believe and like what we look into. Okay, confirmation bias. You can see this one so often too. We usually look for evidence to confirm our beliefs while ignoring all evidence that may disprove it. So what does this sound like to you right now? Everyone in 2020, right? A lot of people are really polarized, and they have their beliefs, and then they're going to look up information that proves their beliefs and ignore evidence against their beliefs. So confirmation bias, we want to confirm what we already know. Take a history assignment and say it talks about World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. Well, you know nothing about the Cold War, but you know a lot about World War II, so what are you going to do? You're going to answer all those questions about World War II to confirm, oh yes, I am smart. I know a lot about World War II. So that's just an academic example. So how do we overcome these? How do we not get sucked into our biases? How do we not become overconfident or focus on hindsight bias or get entangled with pseudoscience? Well, you have to critically think. And so psychology kind of has this formula for keeping a scientific attitude, and it's composed of curiosity, We want to always be curious to learn more. You're going to add that with some skepticism, right? You're not going to just believe everything you hear. You're going to doubt things and you're going to question them. And then you're going to add humility to that. So it's 3 things. And humility is just accepting when you're wrong and figuring out how to not be incorrect in the future. So you have to be curious, you have to be skeptical, and you have to have humility. Those are the 3 things that you need to keep a scientific attitude and to overcome some of those biases that we've talked about. Okay, so if you are thinking critically, you are not going to just blindly accept arguments and conclusions, right? You always want to be investigating, researching, asking questions. A lot of us just watch the news and we're like, oh, yep, that's the way it is. And maybe it is, but maybe it isn't, right? So we want to make sure that we are constantly researching and investigating. Okay, so when we're not blindly accepting arguments and conclusions, that means we are examining them, looking for assumptions, looking for hidden values or any other things that are untrue. We want to make sure that we're always challenging. So if you were given the statistic that 1 in every 3 teenagers is predicted to be less intelligent than their older counterpart at their age, would you accept that? Well, if you're in my class, you're a teenager, taking AP Psych, learning about it. Can you accept that? Does that make you angry? If that makes you angry and you're like, no, that's dumb, I'm not dumb, then that's cool. But you just want to make sure that you're not letting a bias or an emotion overwhelm you in not thinking critically, if that makes sense. Okay, scientific method. So how do we know if something is true? Well, when we look at psychology, you're going to see a lot of theories, which theories are not proven facts. They are just information that is close to the truth as possible, right? But there's no way to officially prove that it is true. So let's just keep that in mind. You're going to see a lot of theories in psychology. So we have a scientific method. So psychologists, just like all other scientists, use a scientific method to construct theories that organize, summarize, and simplify observation. So we have a method just like everyone else. It's very systematic because we never want to get to the point where we say, oh, this is common sense. No, that's not scientific, and it might be common sense to you, but it might not be to another person. So that's not good enough to just say overall. Because something can be proven or disproven. So let's look at what a theory is, because we're going to throw this term around a lot, and I think some of us don't really know the true definition of a theory, or we take theories as facts and we don't challenge and investigate them the way that we should. Okay, so looking at a theory, like I said, it's not fact, but it's an explanation that integrates principles, organizes, and predicts behaviors or events. So it's highly researched, and there have been a lot of experiments and research that have gone into theories, and it's organized under multiple studies of ideas. So for example, take evolution, that is a theory, right? So when you learn about it in biology, there has been a lot of research, there's been a lot of experiments with it, but it is, at the end of the day, it's a theory. So this isn't just an idea, right? There has to be a lot of prep work that goes into something to make it a theory. Like I said, experiments, research, replication of those things over and over again. We also have a hypothesis, which most of you should know at this point. It's just a testable prediction, and it's often induced by a theory. So we have an idea, we have a theory. Now we want to do an experiment and we need to create a hypothesis. So this is an if-then statement. So if this occurs, then this will occur, or if this is the variable, then this will happen. I bet a lot of us are really familiar with that. You've probably been having to write hypotheses since middle school using that if-then format. So just keep that in mind. We do have those here in psychology as well. So research observation. So sometimes we are just observing things or we're going to manipulate some sort of variable. And then in turn, that research is going to help support or disprove whatever theory that we're looking at. Now, this is so, so important. So if you have checked out, guess what? Check back in. If you get nothing from this video, please understand what an operational definition is, because for some reason it's a hard concept for a lot of kids to understand. But if you're going to test something, if you're going to test two variables, you have to be able to explicitly define those variables and how you're going to test them. So they have to be measurable and they have to be manageable. So for example, if I want to measure happiness, like happiness is one of my variables, how am I going to operationally define that so people can replicate my experiment? Because happiness is really vague. So if I say happiness is based on how much you smile every day, well, the next person might say, no, happiness is based on how often you feel happy during a day. And so it just gets really, really complicated. And so you just need to make sure that you are testing something that you can measure and that you can manage, and that you explicitly define what it is and how you're going to use it in your experiment. So here we go. I'm going to give you a task. I want you to come up with operational definitions for happiness, a smile, intelligence, popularity, and good music. Have fun, because those are really hard. So you're going to come up with those in your notes, and then we're going to do a discussion on it, because I want to see everyone's different operational definition, because spoiler alert, they're going to be different. So we have to be able to completely define our variables so people can replicate the experiment, so we can get that result over and over and over again to back up or prove or disprove whatever theory we're looking at. So I hope that makes sense. So hopefully you have filled out your notes under thinking critically, and catch you later with the next video.